Okay. In the last video, we talked about the history of the last part of the history of Neo-Paganism. Mentioned that it got increasing attention in the 80s and 90s, and because of the internet, that helped. Then we got into paganism, and we talked about where this term paganism came from. And actually, the word itself traces back to ancient Roman times, early church times, and it had the connotation of someone who did not believe in the one true sovereign God, basically. And also, the connotation was made later that, I think it was later, that in the rural districts, the old faiths lingered. And by old faiths, this article means the secret mysteries, secret mystery cults. I'm not surprised. I've looked through some of that stuff, and yeah, it's true. You know, they're absolutely right. It was practiced. The old faiths were practiced in the rural districts. We had just finished talking about the Bhagavad Gita, that when classifying the caste system stated that rich people worshiped one god, and that the peasants or the lower caste people worshipped were polytheistic. And it also said something very interesting. It said that people who worship many gods follow after the desires and passions of their own heart. And they worship what they created to be God. And it's kind of looked down on with disdain, this view of polytheism. So just thought I'd throw that out there. Not trying to diss anybody. I'm just saying that it was understood according to the Hindu scriptures that people who lived this way and practiced this way had a habit of following after themselves and worshiping objects that weren't really God. They're just something that they created out of their imagination. But anyway, interest in pagan traditions was revived in the Renaissance, at first in Renaissance magic as a revival of Greco-Roman magic. A little bit later, I'm going to be talking about chaos magic specifically. In the 17th century, description of paganism turned from the theological aspect to the ethnological, and a religion began to be understood as part of the ethnic identity of a people, and the study of the religions of primitive peoples triggered questions as to the ultimate historical origin of religion. Paganism resurfaces as a topic of fascination in 18th and 19th century Romanticism, in particular in the context of the literary Celtic and Viking revivals, which portrayed historical Celtic and Germanic polytheists as noble savages. And then it goes on, it talks about how the Brothers Grimm compiled these books of stories that these people had because the scholars were interested in reading these quote-unquote fairy tales. The work of the Brothers Grimm influenced other collectors, both inspiring them to collect tales and leading them to similarly believe that the fairy tales of the country were particularly representative of it, to the neglect of cross-cultural influence. Romanticist interest in non-classical antiquity coincided with the rise of Romantic nationalism and the rise of the nation-state in the context of 1848 revolutions, leading to the creation of national epics and national myths for the various newly formed states. Okay, so basically another occultic revival happened, and it caused people to want to have an interest in fairy tales. Fairy tales, you know, there's often little snippets of good truth in fairy tales. But to be honest with you, I would not. I mean, I use fairy tales sometime to bring out a point. I don't necessarily use it for anything else. Um, but anyway, I'm just saying. I There's really no need for someone to build their life around fairy tales and worship characters in fairy tales. I think that's pretty ridiculous, but you know. Anyway, what is the conclusion? And here's why I think it's so ridiculous to worship characters in fairy tales. Greeks had fairy tales. They're called the tales of or trials of Odysseus Kent. The guy, the whole Greek mythology thing. Um, the the Greeks worship the characters that were in their fairy tales, much like some people worship their superheroes in comic books. No joke. No joke. Anyway, what is the character of these gods like? Note that the emphasis on paganism and neo-paganism, what they all hold in common is the belief in many gods. My question is what is the character of these gods like? I can tell you about the Greek gods. They weren't so noble. Zeus was bipolar. His wife, Hera, suffered from jealousy. Apollo was vengeful. Just look at Zeus alone. He had anger problems. He killed. He got revenge on people that he didn't like. He did a whole bunch of stuff. A whole bunch of stuff that's not noble. And I'm just asking, what is the characters of these gods like? These Celtic gods, these Norwegian gods, these other gods. What is their character like? Just read the stories. B, are these gods loving? I had one person tell me that, your God committed genocide, and it was a lame excuse. Your God committed genocide, and yet our gods never claimed to be loving to begin with. Well, that's not a good thing. Because if your gods aren't even loving at all, why would I want to serve a God that throws a temper tantrum? Why would I want to serve a God who cheats on his quote-unquote wife? Why would I want to worship a God like that? I don't. I don't know about you. I mean, if you want to, that's your personal preference. But, hey, it's not a good path to go down. It's not. If there isn't really one God at all, but a whole bunch of gods, wouldn't worshiping these multitude of gods promote chaos instead of order? What if a person didn't worship a vengeful God and only worshiped compassionate deities? Wouldn't the vengeful God become jealous and want to get revenge? You see, you open a whole big can of worms when you say, oh, I worship many gods. Well, which one? You can't serve them all because you know what? In Hinduism, once again, there's over 12 billion or so gods. If I'm not mistaken, that was the statistic, several billion. Which God? Now, and this is the last one. And this question is pretty important. Are these gods merely symbols or do they really exist? If they exist, why should they be worshipped? If they don't really exist, then why worship something that you created with your own hands? That's my conclusion, and I would love for some answers. Because so far, all I've gotten is people calling me names, saying that I'm this and I'm that, and that I'm making a whole bunch of assumptions about something that I don't even know about, but yet they can't even provide a reason for why they believe what they believe. And until I have that,